As we kick off this event, I want to thank our sponsor, the Barr Foundation. It is through their generosity that we're able to bring these insightful conversations to you. The Senator and I will be having a timely conversation about the current state of climate action on Capitol Hill. Please share your questions in the Q&A function. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can, but we'll also share your questions with the Senator's office. As we're waiting for Senator Markey to make his way to his office to join us on this webinar, I want to emphasize how important it is that we're having this conversation right now with so much at stake. And I want to thank the Alliance for Business Leadership, our board and membership, for being stalwart supporters of climate action. Now I would like to introduce our very special guest. Ed Markey is a national leader on energy, climate change. He is chair of the Clean Air, Climate, and Nuclear Safety Subcommittee of the Environment and Public Works Committee, as well as a member of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee. He is also chair of the Senate Committee Climate Task Force. These key positions, combined with his more than 40 years of legislative experience, make him a powerful influence on national and international energy policy. In 2009, Senator Markey partnered with Henry Waxman to write the landmark Waxman-Markey bill. This was the only comprehensive climate legislation ever to pass the chamber of Congress. It gave hope to the world that the United States was serious about addressing climate change and helped President Obama effectively negotiate with the international community. Senator Markey is a champion for environmental justice, in introducing innovative legislation to deploy hyperlocal air quality monitoring systems across environmental justice communities, as well as legislation that would take groundbreaking steps toward identifying and connecting environmental justice communities with policy outcomes. And finally, as we all know, Senator Markey is the Senate co-author of the Green New Deal resolution with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a 10-year mobilization to transform our economy and democracy, all while addressing climate change. It calls for massive investment in 100% clean, renewable, zero-emitting energy, green transportation, and climate resilient infrastructure, supporting the creation of millions of jobs, something that ABL cares a lot about. Senator, thank you so much for joining us, and please take it from here. Tell us what you're working on.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for all of the great work which you do. Thank you for being, kind of the organizing principle so that this Alliance for Business Leadership can continue to focus upon the future of Massachusetts, who we are, what we need to get done in order to, make the rest of this century as great as the first 20 years of it have been, exempting the coronavirus pandemic. And so I thank you. And of course, it's central to all of who we are and what we do is the fact that we're a technology leader for the whole planet. We're only 2% of America, but we're not an ordinary 2%. We're the technology leaders, and we're the technology leaders globally too. We know that businesses all around the world are now looking at Massachusetts as a biotech leader, as a clean tech leader. We've got Amazon, Google, the whole world's coming to Massachusetts, and we have to continue to maintain our leadership. And clean tech is an area where we're going to be challenged to work smarter and not harder. How do we use technology to solve these problems? And that's going to be right up our alley, who we are, what we need to do. And again, the headlines every single night on NBC, CBS, ABC, or Hurricane Ida. I mean, my God, how strong is a storm that does devastation of historic proportion down in Louisiana? And it's still, by the time 2,000 miles later, it hits Massachusetts, it can drop 9.5 inches of rain on New Bedford in a day. So we know this is very real. We know that we have the second fastest warming body of water in the world after the Arctic, right off our coastline. It's called the Gulf of Maine, but we also just call it Boston Harbor. It's Cape Cod. And so we know we're right in the crosshairs. We know that we are extremely vulnerable, but in that comes an opportunity for us to be the leaders. So right now, we have a $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. And just for bridges and roads and transit, Massachusetts is going to get close to $8 billion out of that bill. $8 billion. That money will go to Governor Baker, but it will allow for a lot of investment in technologies that are cleaner and more modern in the 21st century, but create a lot of jobs for us as well. And by the way, there's a ton of dough in there for broadband for Massachusetts and for the whole country. It's bipartisan. It is going to pass at some point here, but only after we go through a very contentious process in trying to figure out what to do with the reconciliation bill, trying to figure out how do we get the $3.5 trillion bill, or a high percentage of it also passed, that has right now about $550 billion of climate related programs that are included. So right now we're holding the line in terms of making sure that the second bill has a huge percentage of all the things that are already in the $550 billion worth of climate related projects. And again, of that, Massachusetts would receive, well, we get about 2% of everything. So it would be about 2%. If anyone out there watching can do the quick math, but it could be upwards of, I guess, $10–12 billion would come in just to Massachusetts for clean energy technologies. So I think my math is right on that. So on top of the $8 billion in the bipartisan bill, there'd be another 10 or 12 billion in clean energy money just coming into Massachusetts, and it would be, in the form of the clean energy tax breaks, or the clean energy payment program, a separate program that would just be saying to the utilities in Massachusetts, we're going to pay you to move quickly off of fossil fuels and onto clean energy technologies, and money for charging stations. Maybe upwards of $80 or $100 million for charging stations in Massachusetts that would help to expedite that part of the clean energy transition that we'd be talking about. Now, how would it be expedited? Well, it would be expedited by a 10-year tax break that we'd put on the books to help consumers purchase all electric vehicles. So we'd be doing it in a complementary way, thinking about how we would be using the tax code to incentivize consumers to buy the vehicles, and then at the same time to make sure the charging stations are there for them. And in addition, there's going to be billions of dollars in to expand and electrify the public transportation system. That's all electric buses, but it's also money for the T, money for rail going out to Western Mass down into the southeastern portion of Massachusetts, and the funding that we've been lacking for a long, long time in order to ensure that we're doing what we know is historically necessary to make this transition. So inside of the bill, and again, we're going to fight hard for it, will be the tax breaks, for example, for offshore wind for 10 years. So that any offshore wind developer will have a guaranteed roadway, long-term, 10-year guaranteed tax breaks that will be there, expanding upon the tax break which Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island and I were able to put on the books in December of 2020. It already seems like ancient history. We've gone through an attack on the Capitol and impeachment of Donald Trump, all of this just since December of 2020. But that's a 30% tax break. It's on the books right now that Sheldon Whitehouse and I were successful in instituting that will make it predictable for the offshore wind industry for the next 5 years. But we want to extend it out for 10 years so that we've got the kind of predictable long-term investment, environment for the private sector. And so from my perspective, this is kind of a turning point. It's an inflection point. This is our chance. Back 12 years ago, the Waxman-Markey bill, which I was the co-author of, passed the House. That was an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by the year 2050. It got killed in the Senate, although it did pass the House. And what we have to do now is to capture this moment. This is the biggest moment since then, so that we can telescope the time frame it takes for us to deploy the new technologies that are already there. A lot of this doesn't even have to get invented. We just have to create an environment by which we are installing, these new technologies. We can't wait another 10 years. I have in the bill so far. We'll see how it all goes. We're working with Joe Manchin and others, but I have a $30 billion program for a clean energy accelerator, clean energy bank, that would make it possible for a city, a town, a private sector company to apply for a super low interest loan, to be able to invest in clean energy technologies. And McKinsey's done an analysis of this approach, and it says for every dollar the federal government puts up in the Clean Energy Accelerator Bank, $7 to $8 will be invested by the private sector, because it will have incentivized that investment in that particular area. So that's my opening for you, Jen. I'm very very hopeful. No guarantees, and there's going to be some pushing and shoving here between now and President Biden's desk when both bills are sitting there. But ultimately, the prospects are good, and the more the business community can be pushing for these programs, is the better off the ultimate product will be. And we know simultaneously that young people have risen up and are the kind of the backbone of this movement. But ultimately, it's towards ensuring that business people can really take advantage of these programs and invent and deploy these technologies. So I thank you all for joining, and look forward, Jen, to any questions you may have.
Oh, this is great. Well, I have to say, first of all, thank you for being here. One of the reasons I love talking with you is you always just put it out there. You just lay it out. You're very frank, very open. And it's so refreshing to really hear sort of your perspective and sort of get the inside scoop. And you mentioned, talking with your colleagues. And do you really get, especially with what we've seen across country the last few years, especially the last 2 years, fires, storms, we've seen reports coming out with the dire predictions and where we are in climate. Do you get a sense of urgency from your colleagues, even across the aisle, that there is growing concern that, yeah, we have to do something, we have to do it quickly?
I wish we did. I think you have to assume that Republicans are taking note of these terrible events, from the forest fires to the flooding to the storms. But ultimately, when we need their vote in order to do something about it, in order to engage in preventative care of the planet through deployment of technology in a revolutionary way, their votes aren't there for that. And it's largely because the fossil fuel industry has a stake in the status quo. That's their business model. So we're unfortunately going to be forced to do this, on a partisan basis, Democrats only. It's not that the science is Democrat only. The science is bipartisan. That's how young people see it. But we're going to have to do reconciliation without them. We're going to have to do the climate money without them. And again, we do realize that that the fossil fuel industry has a reason to be apprehensive about going to all electric vehicles, about having an all clean energy, transmission system and electrical utility system in the United States. They do have a reason for that. But at the same time, we can't ask China, we can't ask India to do something if we're not doing it ourselves. You can't preach temperance from a bar stool. You can't be sitting on the bar stool with a beer in your hand saying drinking's bad, or a cigar in your mouth saying smoking's bad. You have to actually do it yourself. And then you have the political, moral credibility to tell other countries that we have to all be in this together. So we know it's popular with the American people, these policies, overwhelmingly so, but it's a Republican Party. I hate to say it, but it's true. GOP now stands for Gas and Oil Party. That's where they are. And we're going to have to do this alone.
Well, and we're pretty fortunate here in Massachusetts that there is bipartisan support for climate legislation and climate change. And it's unfortunate that Washington isn't taking some cues from what we're doing here in Massachusetts. But, moving on, it's, interesting that so much of what you've been working on, and I really see you as sort of the moral compass on climate in the Senate, and I want to thank you for that. A lot of what you've been working on over the last several years, and especially in the Green New Deal, you have been inserting every place you can. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of those really transformative programs that you've been working on. And I know in particular, there's a lot of business tax incentives that I know my members are interested in, but workforce development and creating pipelines into these new industries, especially, what we're seeing here and some of the partners we're working with is the labor community coming on board and really getting excited about training their future leaders into these new opportunities and creating diversity in these industries. And I'm wondering if this is exciting your colleagues, and if there's talk about how do you expand the workforce and retrain workers into this workforce?
Yeah, well, I have the offshore, job training, wind job training bill. I'll give you a good example. And this is a bill that introduced with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. We have the entire Progressive Caucus in the House on board. Chuck Schumer is totally on board on this, and Joe Biden wants to see it happen, and that's a civilian climate corps. And right now it's budgeted for about $30 billion, and it will employ upwards of 75,000 young people a year. And the little twist on this is that we're going to do it in conjunction with Marty Walsh, the Secretary of Labor, who will be given the resources to, have the apprentice training programs, partnering with local building trades, so that these young people in a civilian climate corps will be given a skill set and then ultimately a pathway into union membership. Because this isn't going to be just a job, it's going to be a career. It's wind and solar, energy efficiency technologies, protecting our coastlines, our forests, you name it. This is going to go on for our lifetime. We've loaded the dice in the atmosphere. And what we're trying to do now is just limit all the additional damage, which could be caused. So this is a little bit like right now, we're trying to convince, I would say, a 30 or 40-year-old, please stop smoking your 2 packs of Camels today. It's already bad enough. Please don't smoke Camels for another 10 years or 15 years, because the consequences will be totally catastrophic. And right now, please stop. So that's where we are. But even if you've smoked for those first 20 years, you've still done some real damage. And we have to have a workforce out there who will be, trying to put in place the prevention for the long term. But now we have to actually have workers who will be out there protecting the coastlines, the watersheds, the wetlands, the forest. There's just going to be so much work to be done that is the equivalent of what the original Civilian Conservation Corps did back in the 1930s. But it will be a job creation engine that will really I think embraced by this next generation of young people. I think they're ready to go, and so so I'll have in the money for a $25 million workforce training program for offshore wind, and we'll just try to build on it. We had a great bill signing, a great project labor agreement signing about 6 weeks ago down in New Bedford with General Electric and with the building trades of Massachusetts. It's 500 new union jobs for Massachusetts, but we're going to use Bristol Community College. We're going to use UMass Dartmouth as places where the training can be done, and then our workforce will be moved into these new sectors.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's excellent. And for so long, so many people said, oh, the trades aren't going to come along. They're going to fight against sort of this new push in green tech and green jobs. And yet they're coming. I mean, they're here with us, and it's really amazing.
Well, can I say this? Yeah, there were some building trades, obviously, that wanted to just keep building pipelines, okay? But we're not going to be building any more pipelines in Massachusetts. We're moving on.
All right, I'm writing that down. Yeah.
and the future is going to be tens of thousands of new jobs in this new sector. And we should just get ready. I was watching Bill Ford, the CEO of Ford, a couple of nights ago, announced that 40% of their fleet is going to be all electric by the year 2030, all the vehicles that they're selling. And they asked him, one of the questions that Lester Holt asked him was, what do you think your great-grandfather would be saying about this transition to all electric? And Bill Ford's answer was, my great-grandfather, he would say, what took you so long? So yeah, it got delayed, should have happened sooner, but it's happening now. And we have to prepare our workforce for these jobs, because it's not just electric vehicles that might be made in Tennessee or Detroit. It's then the charging stations. Who's going to be installing them? No, it's the transmission system for the clean energy technologies coming off of the ocean, or off of people's roofs, or off of the town dumps that have an ability to now generate clean electricity with solar panels put over the town dump. All of this is going to require, in Massachusetts, tens of thousands of union workers who are trained with this technology skill to be able to get this job done.
Well, another place where we need skilled workers is to update our grid. And, that's a piece that I think, we all talk about green and renewable energy projects, but, a piece that is often not talked about is grid infrastructure, and working on part of this transition is really beefing up that infrastructure. And we have an aging shared grid in all of New England. And I'm wondering how you work with your regional partners in New England talking about ISO New England and that infrastructure to move this new renewable energy around the region?
Okay, back in the 1990s, I was the author of the 3 key laws that moved us from analog to digital, from narrowband to broadband. Before I passed my 3 bills as the chairman of telecommunications, this is sad to say, but Alexander Graham Bell would have recognized our telecommunications system.
Yeah.
Sad to say, from the moment where, right where the JFK building is downtown, that's where Alexander Graham Bell said, "Watson, come here." Okay, well, that system they then built out over the next 20 or 30 years. Unfortunately, even by the time we reached 1990, people could have recognized it. Well, the same thing is true for our electricity grid right now. It's something that Thomas Alva Edison could recognize, but we got to move. We got to move to this new renewable energy transmission system which is a smart grid. And by the way, let me just say this: without my 3 bills in the 1990s, we could not be talking about a smart grid, because much of what a smart grid is using broadband technology to manage the electricity, to manage the wind, the solar, the energy efficiency. So you needed one revolution to create the second revolution, and this second revolution will then beget a third and a fourth and a fifth, as young people then start to play off of those new opportunities. We don't know it's going to be called Google, eBay, Amazon, Hulu, any more than we know what's about to unfold once we put the new transmission system in place. But I do know we'll be at the forefront of it, that our universities, our smart young people will be the ones inventing these new technologies. So yeah, we've got to have our incumbent utilities, our incumbent managers of the grid for New England, to just move and move fast, okay? Because we, again, in New England, off of our coastline, we're in the crosshairs. What's really happening is that the Gulf Stream is slowing down. That's why largely because our waters, yeah, the temperatures are increasing, but what's happening up in Greenland with the melting of all that fresh water into the ocean, that's like creating a blockage, which is absolutely changing our environment. And we're right at the center of what is happening with those changes in the Gulf Stream. And if we don't act ourselves as leaders, then we can't ask the rest of the country or the rest of the world to act. But it's in our own self-interest to move before the damage compounds. Otherwise, the White Mountains of New Hampshire will be known as the mountains formerly known as the White Mountains, because the snow will be gone. So we have a stake for the skiing industry, for the cod, the lobster. They need cold water, and the waters are getting so warm, they're just voting with their fins. They're voting with their claws. They're moving north. They're moving towards Maine. They're moving towards Canada. So it has tremendous economic negative impacts on us. And we need our utilities, those that are responsible for our transmission system, to respond. And we're going to have to provide the incentives. And there's going to be upwards of $36 billion that is made available for a change in transmission systems across the country. And we have to apply for our share of that, 2% of it, which is a ton of dough, hundreds of millions of dollars to help in investing in a new transmission system. And we're going to need better cooperation. Can I say this? Much better cooperation across state lines. We just can't solve this. Each state has to solve it. We have to think regionally. And I'm just getting a little bit fed up with all of the intramural squabbles that go on, all the small ball that goes on, rather than stepping back and thinking big time about a problem. We almost have to tolerate the small-minded, petty little disputes that might have been acceptable in the past, but when you're confronted with an existential threat, it just is no longer going to be acceptable. And I'm pretty much getting fed up with it as I'm watching, this petty struggles that go on across state lines. We just have to get past that moment.
Yeah. And so often states are pitted against, they're often competing against each other for, business, their like economic prowess and other things. ABL is working with our New England partners. We're a leader in the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition. And so we're trying to push that same concept in we're all coming together. We share a grid. We should be sharing both the effort and the benefit of investing in this technology. So we're with you, and we'll work with you on that.
Yeah, when I was growing up in Malden, I used to think I had to compete against Medford. That was my vision. Okay. And that was our economic vision too, the Malden businessman against the Medford businessman. Well, today, our whole New England economy is competing against the Chinese. Our whole New England economy is competing against Europe. Okay. So if we don't step back and see that we're only 2% of America, New England might be a grand total of 6% of America. We need a plan. Okay. And that plan just can't be, we're competing against those cities or towns in these adjoining states. No, we're all in this together. We need a common vision for how we use our technological prowess in order to compete. My grandfather got off the boat from Ireland to work in the mills of Dover, New Hampshire, and then moved over to Lawrence, which is where my father grew up in Lawrence, Massachusetts. But I'm afraid that people are still thinking maybe Dover is competing against Lawrence in some manner, shape, or form, when it's all part of one large technological synergy that we need to create so that everyone is able to make it, not just a small number of companies, utilities in most instances, that are just trying to use their political clout or their technological roadblock building capacity to stop the creation of the synergies that help everyone, all 13 million people in New England, to be beneficiaries, not just a couple of companies. And the headline should be New England wins, not this one or two or three companies win. Okay. And that's unfortunately still a mentality, which is a part of it. And to be honest with you, that's why I ultimately said, we got to break up these monopolies, the cable and telephone monopolies. We just can't know the names of the only telecommunications companies because there's only 2 or 3 of them. We want thousands of them whose names nobody knows. That's when New England wins. And that's what we're going to have to do in the energy sector too, in this transmission sector, in this whole unleashing of a technological clean energy revolution. So the very fact that everyone right now has a chief technology officer, that was my goal back, a chief information officer, that was my goal back in the 1990s. Now we need a chief energy officer in every company, so they can be thinking that way as well. And we're only going to do that if we break down the architecture that existed historically.
Well, we have a lot of questions coming in, and I know we don't have time for all of them. But I want to get to some of them at least. So Michael Rubenstein asks, what tax incentives for fossil fuel production are likely to be eliminated and which will stay? So wondering if you have had thoughts around this or if there's conversation.
Well, in Senator Wyden's bill, he repeals all of the fossil fuel tax breaks that are on the books and just substitutes one large tax break for every single clean energy technology in the United States. Okay. And that can be battery storage, it can be wind, solar, it can be anything that meets a clean energy test. And those will be on the books for 10 years. And under Senator Wyden's formulation, the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, the fossil fuel tax rates will be taken off the books. They've been on the books for 100 years. Okay, time to, let's move on to the new tax rates. Now, over in the House side, I don't think that they're as receptive to removing the fossil fuel tax breaks, to be honest with you. So we'll see how that comes out in a conference committee or in discussions between the House and Senate. But the good news is that once we put the tax breaks on the books for the long term for the clean energy technologies, just get out of the way, because it's just a matter of time before fossil fuels lose. So actually a level playing field is in many ways enough for us, for the clean energy technologies to win. And as we all know, God decided there would be no oil or natural gas or coal under the soil of New England. So we're big beneficiaries in moving to a tax model that incentivizes technology as the solution. And ultimately, that's going to be the biggest part of the bill.
Tim Cronin asks, and I have to ask this question, what is the future for carbon pricing at the federal level?
Well, we're going to have, so far, we've been able to include a methane tax, a methane fee in the Senate bill, which will generate about $9 billion worth of revenues. And that's a way, obviously, of discouraging any further, methane emissions, coming up out of natural gas or oil or you name it source in our country. And we think that's going to be a very important price signal. We're still in discussion about a broader carbon tax and whether or not it will be included. That's more controversial. But the discussion, in general, is putting an initial price of $15 or $20 a ton price on carbon. But that's not been determined yet as to whether or not it will be included. But it is on the table between the House and the Senate right now, especially if other revenue sources are taken out of the larger bipartisan bill.
So David Gasson asks, what are the odds that significant climate energy legislation will be included in the reconciliation package?
Well, it's a great question. And, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind right now. We're going to work as hard as we can. There will be significant climate stuff that's in the bill, but what the final numbers are, I will tell you this: Senator Manchin has he's the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee. He has yet to mark up. He has yet to finish the votes in his committee on what is approximately about $200 billion worth of clean energy, of climate-related money that has been given to his committee in order to determine where it is going to be going, which includes the Clean Energy Payments Program, which is budgeted for about $150 billion. So Senator Manchin has yet to finish that out of his committee. And so we'll see what happens. Obviously, we're all talking, to Senator Manchin, to Senator Kirsten Sinema from Arizona, trying to get the biggest possible numbers for these programs, but yet to be determined. But the energy level on our side, trying to make it big, is huge.
Jeremy McDermott is here from the Northeast Clean Energy Council, and he asks about interstate cooperation. How can you and your congressional colleagues prompt better coordination on transmission planning and construction to make sure we have clean energy going forward? So we touched on this some, but
yeah, I would say that the answer is that from my perspective, I think that we have to be tying the funding to cooperation. Just can't be, hey, we've got to build our own independent castle here again. It's got to be something that reflects the need for us to have more interoperability, interconnectivity, the ability to be able to transmit these electrons, in a way that ultimately are successful in helping to make New England a leader. And so it's going to be a challenge because of I've spent my entire career fighting telecommunications and energy monopolies. Okay. They're the opposite. They're the opponents of real progress, of technological change. And so from my perspective, everything that we're doing here has to be aimed towards making it easier to have that kind of cooperation, and maybe tying the funding to it is the way to do it.
All right, so I think we have time for maybe one more. Phil Edmondson asks if Medford about Medford football, but I'll put that aside. In regard to clean energy, how do you view the business players in the energy sector more broadly? Is there a distinction between utilities and the oil, gas exploration companies? For example, are other business groups exerting any force for change?
Is there
So how are business groups exerting their force for change on the utility companies or the oil and gas exploration companies? So if you were to put them together or take them apart, what can we as a business organization do to help exert pressure?
Okay, look, bottom line is we're an entrepreneurial economy, and there's a pre-existing set of energy companies that are huge, and they always are seeking to exert maximum economic pressure. So and we know the oil and gas companies are absolutely fighting hard to block us. I suspect very strongly that the natural gas industry is behind the attempts to slow down the Vineyard Winds project in the lawsuits that are being brought, because obviously the more wind we bring in is the less natural gas we need for our electricity generation. Okay, so there's a built-in natural tension with what we're trying to do in capturing our natural resources technologically, and what these pre-existing huge energy companies want to do. So, and we're at the turning point. So that's my that's why I'm going to work very hard over the next couple of weeks to see this bill pass, because it's going to empower the people who are on this call, but we need to hear their voices. We want to help to make them much richer than they are right now. That's my goal, to make them better members of your association. And I have to stop right here. I apologize, but I'm about to introduce up in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, 2 floors above me, Claire Cronin from Massachusetts as our nominee to be the ambassador to Ireland. And I am going to be introducing her as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to all of the other members. So I apologize to everyone who is there, but thank you for what you're doing to make Massachusetts not just the Bay State, but the brain state. But that goes for all of New England. That's who we are. We've got to kind of capture this new industrial revolution and be the same kind of pioneers that we were in every century preceding this. And thank you, Jen, for your great leadership on all these issues.
Well, thank you so much. And please give my former colleague, Rep. Cronin, my best. And my other former colleague, who I know is sitting with you. And thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're very busy, and we appreciate it. And ABL is with you. So anything we can do to be helpful. Yeah. We're working to change the business climate for climate.
Yeah, and Jen is referring to Jim Cantwell, who is my state director, who is a former state representative. If anybody out there needs anything specific for your companies, please call Jim Cantwell in my Boston office. So thank you all so much. Great to be with you.
Thank you so much. And with that, I am so sorry if we were not able to get to your questions, but we are going to share your questions with the senator's office, and he had to run. So thank you for spending time with us today. We encourage you to get involved with our progressive business community to promote civic engagement and action. Please reach out to me to learn more. Thanks for coming.